Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I have the honor of moderating this panel on technology and data ecosystems in the insurance industry. My name is Mark Schwartz. I am a principal of a brokerage general agency, but today I'm just going to be asking questions and having our panelists respond to those. We understand and appreciate that there's no one solution in the technology world for how we use technology to help solve problems in our businesses and in this industry. And so we have a diverse panel today representing a carrier, a brokerage GA, and a vendor technologist to help bring some insights to you all on what's going on in technology today. Before we get started though, why don't we have our panelists introduce themselves? Ellen, why don't we start with you?
Perfect. Well, thank you, Mark. Welcome. My name is Ellen Kusilek. I'm a national sales executive with Securian Financial. My role is really kind of a hybrid role. So I work out of our home office and on the road. I work with several BGA relationships, primarily in the West Coast, and I also handle the relationship management piece of FFR and TELUS. I've really been fortunate to get a bird's eye view of our growth into the general brokerage space. With Securian, we started this journey in early 2007 with one product on our shelves and have grown significantly ever since. So now we offer a full product suite and have expanded to include linked benefits and executive benefits. And each product's really backed by a carrier with strong financials, strong ratings, and a commitment to our policyholders.
Thanks, Ellen. That's great. Ryan?
Thank you. I'm Ryan Pinney. I think probably many watching this know who I am. I get dragged into the technology conversation a lot because
right.
Our agency, Pinney Insurance, where I'm the president, is a very tech-heavy or tech-enabled BGA and distribution platform and office. And so we are a national BGA with agents all over the country, as well as have a large direct-to-consumer distribution model that we launched in 2001.
Great. Hey, Rick, you're last.
Yep. No, thanks, Mark. So I've been in the insurance technology space for over 25 years now. We built a lot of enterprise systems, always focused around data aggregation. So, yeah, I mean, we have implementations where we have more than 40 back office integrations, pulling all the product information forward into one single database. We've built out dozens of advisor portals, consumer portals, do a lot of systems integration and so on. So, and then we launched NIC, of course, in 2017, and we're going to talk a bit more about that platform today.
Terrific. Well, thanks for the introductions, everybody. You know, the first sort of question I want to get at is I think maybe for some of you on listening, remember the introduction of WinFlex back in the 80s, and Craig Earnshaw developed what I believe was the first multi-carrier, multi-product illustration comparison tool that really was coming out at the exact time that independent brokerage distribution was sort of gaining its footing in the industry and beginning to expand. And it was really a game changer. I don't know if before that it was really that easy for independents to be able to compare product and understand rate classes and how products perform. So what do you all think is sort of a game changer that has helped in each of your spaces in more recent times? Ellen, from the carrier perspective, what would you say to that question?
I would have to say that it's the end-to-end digital process. I mean, we live in a world where technology has changed how we've lived, you know, drastically over the years, and it seems to continue to change every day. And the ability to take an application digitally, have it be in good order and complete, so you're not constantly running back to the client for additional information, because we all know that is the one thing agents don't want to do. But then that it can flow directly into the accelerated underwriting process. It's been a huge game changer, specifically over the last 9 months, where people weren't meeting face-to-face, and the ability to sell a policy when people understand how important it truly is, as we've seen really come to light during this pandemic, all the way to the signature process and the digital delivery to that servicing of your clients on the online platform.
Yeah, that definitely has shown through in these recent months for sure for the industry. Ryan, from the BGA perspective, what do you think has been the biggest game changer for you?
I think I would probably echo a lot of what Ellen said, but I might even go a little more foundational, which is that digital experience and digital process really has been enabled by the carriers and the industry in a large measure adopting APIs and kind of more open architecture data exchange processes, whether that's through FTP, which some may be familiar with, or APIs, which is kind of the buzzword these days. It's really about moving data from point A to point B in a really efficient way, avoiding the rekeying of information. So I think, operationally from the BGA side, the advantage or the kind of the game changer has been the fact that the carriers have been moving that direction. I think COVID drastically accelerated the pace at which the carriers were making the transition, which is great for the industry. And I think as we kind of continue going forward, I think you'll see this idea of API infrastructure and kind of a digital first experience with, powered by or on top of APIs, really accelerating the growth of the industry and changing how we distribute products. It's not to say maybe that we would get rid of agents, because I don't think that's happening anytime soon, but I think you'll see much more of this tech-enabled, agent-assisted model growing and going forward. And I think that for us, that's probably been the biggest game changer, is having access to data in an efficient way, getting it via data feeds from multiple sources. I wish that was consolidated a little more, but
Right.
Getting the data and having it digitized and digital and able to be used and kind of filtered as we see fit or need for our operations has probably been the biggest game-changing technology over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Rick, from a vendor technologist perspective, what has helped you push your business forward?
Yeah, without a doubt, from my perspective, it's the change in infrastructure and how you manage, infrastructure. If I think back years ago, a new customer would come on board, we'd have to order hardware, so procure the hardware, have to go to the data center, you'd have to set up the hardware and so on. So you'd be maybe tens of thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars into the project before the customer even got up and running. And then, to hire and train and have the resources to maintain the hardware. It was a massive cost, and it would add literally, millions of dollars to the expense line every year. Well, now a new customer comes on board where we use the cloud outsourced provider AWS, which you may be familiar with. I can add a new server in minutes, literally go online, boom, there's a new server set up. So it's allowed us to bring our costs down tremendously. I mean, what we do today, we never could have done this 5 years ago to provide BGA with access to their data. On top of that, it allows us to manage massive amounts of data at a low cost, which again, used to require, huge hardware. And then, kind of to Ryan's point, it's really opened up the whole world from a carrier and from a BGA perspective, because operating on cloud infrastructure allows you to connect much more easily, rather than having to integrate with a legacy system and, have a push data in or pull data out of a legacy system. They're up and running on these cloud hosted solutions, and you can have APIs that connect systems, allow us to talk, share data, share information. So it has just changed the world dramatically for us and made it possible to do business where it wasn't possible a few years ago.
Yeah, it's definitely got a common theme, across all three answers here, is really about sort of the opening up of data. And, I think maybe at the end of this conversation, we can come back and you guys can be futurists, and maybe we'll ask everybody to predict a little bit of where they think the next couple of years goes and what that acceleration curve may be for this. But we'll hold that one till the end. But data is the theme here, and one thing that we know our industry really hasn't been great at, and other parts of the financial services industry have been really wonderful at over the last 20 years, which is opening up the data flow, which has spurred tremendous innovation around the securities end of our industry and banking. And we're lagging a little bit, and one of the places that is important to our audience here is Inforced data, right? How to get access to that in a way that is meaningful and useful. And I know we've all struggled with that. Our industry has struggled with that, kind of to Rick's point, old systems that are 100, whatever, maybe they're 30 or 40 or 50 years old, but they have policies written 80 years ago. And we still have to service those. And our industry has struggled with this. So kind of pushing forward with Inforced data is an important part of what we're all trying to accomplish. So Ellen, from the carrier's perspective, how do you handle making Inforced information available? You're kind of newer to the brokerage world. You've had a career system at Minnesota Life Securian for a long time. So how are you doing that for independent distribution, and what are your plans to make that better and easier?
Yeah, so we've come a long way since the day when it was all done via Excel spreadsheet. And so at least we're not passing information that way anymore. Really, our approach is to provide data through the established standards like DTCC. That's really efficient, and we can turn on new partners really quickly. We're also working in partnership with Insured Connect to enhance what we're providing on DTCC, so it better accommodates the needs for anyone's platform, really. And the nice part is any of those enhancements we make benefit every business partner that we have. We know that there's a lot of different approaches needed for different situations, and currently we're working on an overall data strategy. But the first thing we do is leverage that DTCC or equivalent, and then explore different alternatives that accommodate what that partner needs. That's why we really started with Insured Connect, because our business needs keep evolving, and that allows us to continue to build out what is most beneficial for all of our business partners.
Yeah, a quick follow-up on that from the standpoint of the discussions around the philosophy around data. I think we've all been in various discussions at different carriers. I'm sure you've been part of these at Securian. Is the mindset more open today than you've kind of heard in the past, and there's kind of this understanding that this is really a key to unlocking innovation across our industry with our distribution partners?
I would completely agree with that it is definitely something we're seeing as a definite need, and not even just in data, it's how we work with BGAs. When you're used to just that career force, it's easy to build out your systems and just communicate that way. Knowing that you have individuals who are working with not just us, unfortunately, we have to find ways to help them get the information they need in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. We hope more carriers adopt that kind of mentality. Ryan, so from the BGA perspective, we're challenged because it's multi-carrier, multi-product, multi-agent across so many different platforms. From a standpoint of getting Inforced data and how you use it and how it benefits both your agency and the producers you work with, how are you doing with Inforced data?
Yeah, I think two things there. One item that Ellen touched on, I think maybe is worth kind of re-mentioning, which was the DTC feeds or DTCC feeds. And as you kind of look at data, the theme I think you'll hear echoed or maybe have heard so far is, data is important, but then having it structured, I think, is where it's key, right? And so yeah, we use maybe 30 or 40 carriers in the course of a year on a fairly consistent basis. There's probably our top 15 or 20 that would get the bulk of our business. But what's challenging, I think, from a technology perspective or kind of a distribution perspective, whether that's on the front end where you're selling or on the back end where you're looking at Inforced data and trying to manage book of business, is that the data is not consistent typically. I mean, on the forms side and on some of the the data collection side, we have the Accord standards, and those help. Although a lot of carriers have Accord plus their own kind of hodgepodge.
Right.
And we see this a little bit with DTCC. I'm sure Rick could probably go into a master's or doctorate level thesis on that, or why the data is different and structured differently. But the challenge, I think, and the opportunity kind of both is that as we have more access to data, that democratization of data, again, kind of a popular term these days, it basically enables us to do things we couldn't do before. And I think there's a key benefit to what Insured Connect does, and what a lot of the technology vendors are kind of moving towards today, is trying to give us access to all of the data in the format that we want, or the format that we prefer as a firm or an agency. And I think the challenge, we talked about legacy systems is there, but I think the most important aspect of it is if we can get access to the data at the BGA level, then we have the opportunity to re-engage with agents maybe that we have lost along the way that aren't doing business with us anymore. So I think from a recruiting perspective, there's a huge opportunity, or from a re-engagement perspective with agents. I think there's also, we aren't under a fiduciary standard yet. I say yet because I think it's going to happen, unfortunately, and maybe that's good for some parts of the industry and good for some of what we do, but I think generally it's going to create a lot of challenges. And so I think the fact that we are going to be held to that, we kind of need to be moving that direction now. So being able to provide a consistent way to communicate to the customer and to the agent, the enforced information, policy changes, deadlines for conversions, things like that needs to be more transparent. And I think at the end of the day, we need a way to effectively and easily get not only the enforced illustrations, but the variations of that data. I mean, it's hard today because typically we're calling, the customer service line, and then you're asking for an enforced illustration, and then they're asking you for permission. And, you kind of go through this whole rigmarole of trying to get an illustration that tells you what's going to happen to the policy in 3 or 4 or 5 years if premiums are paid level, if they decrease, if they increase. And that's, there's a lot of work to that really from a technology perspective could be and should be pushed down automatically to the BGAs, using those data feeds that are now becoming more available. So I think there's that kind of a lot to unpack there maybe, but the reality is that's where the whole industry needs to move, and it's where the regulators are going to force us to move if we don't do it on our own. So in my mind, I think the fact that some carriers, Ellen's a good example of that, are already making that transition, already being forward thinking about how they deliver data to the field, and Insured Connect as a platform is looking at how do we kind of homogenize it so it's easy to use across the BGA multi-carrier approach. Tremendously valuable.
Yeah, great stuff. There's a lot we could go on for probably an hour on just those comments that you made. Well, Rick, you're in this space. You've been doing it for a long time, both in Canada, now in the United States. And I think you know how important it is and how powerful it can be. So what are you seeing in the Inforced space, and maybe you can bring some insights to the group on that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, there's been a real shift in carrier attitude in the last few years. Historically, it's been very, very difficult to get them to cooperate. They saw many reasons why they didn't want to liberate their data. And that's changed. I mean, I can't talk of a single carrier that's been difficult from an attitude perspective. They all want to support the industry. They want to get the data out there. They want to make it available. Some of them have technical challenges for sure, getting it out of some of these old systems. So, patience has been a pretty important attribute for us in the last few years. But
we're all great at that, by the way. We're so patient in the BGA community.
Very.
But no, I mean, we've seen some success in the last year, and we've now got, I think we're up to 18 Inforced life feeds now. We're starting with the annuity feeds. We're hoping to add in LTC and DI down the road. And our strategy is very much to make that data available to the BGA community, all through a single secure platform. Make it available through a user interface and through APIs so that they can, plug it into their systems. And as Ryan said, he wants to be able to use it for multiple purposes within his network. And we're trying to be that sort of, group that brings all that information together. We don't use the DTCC feeds if we can help it, because they are expensive, and we're trying to move to a different standard. We have direct feeds in most cases, in virtually all cases almost now. We do use the Accord standards, and even if it is in kind of a DTCC type of format, we'll try to map it into an Accord standard. And then, we're making the data available in a standard format with documentation to the industry so they can leverage and reuse the data for all types of different purposes. The other big change is that, by doing it this way, the cost that comes down is massive by, everybody cooperating, working together, going to the carrier saying, hey, give us one feed for all BGAs. It just saves the carriers a ton of money rather than them having, 200, 300, 400, 500 feeds going out in the marketplace. So it saves them a lot of money. And then from a security perspective, it's also a huge boon, because if every single BGA had to go through the types of security audits that we go through with carriers, my God, we'd still be doing this in 50 years. So if we can start to centralize, share some of these services, like data, which I think, there's a lot of potential to share data. Do it through some centralized platforms like ours. I think it makes a lot of sense. And then, we'll support the industry in as many ways as we can.
I'd love to ask Rick a question and follow up, because
Yeah,
you said
please.
something really, really interesting, which was about the cost of DTCC, and not to pick on a vendor, but in general, I think the cost that I'm going to call them the legacy vendors, the legacy data sources have in place today are really out of line with the reality of what data transmission and data storage cost, right? You mentioned the hardware, and unfortunately, I think that this is one of the challenges is legacy platforms, they're very expensive to build. You mentioned that earlier. I'm kind of curious, are you seeing any price changing, or are you seeing any kind of lessening of the cost to interface with some of these data services? Because historically they've been very exorbitant costs that a BGA wouldn't typically want to incur. The carriers don't really probably want to incur them either. So what are you seeing kind of around the change? Is that why you're going direct? Is cost a factor, I guess, becomes the question.
It's a massive factor for all parties. I don't know if you're familiar with the cost metrics around our platform, but we don't charge carriers to push the data out to the BGA community, and we charge BGAs, next to nothing, to be honest with you, to access all of their data. Once a data feed is set up, Ryan, once you have it running, there's, the costs nowadays are pretty low. Data storage costs nothing, document storage costs nothing. And the technology is there to, synchronize the data and to vet the data as it comes through. You can automate a lot of your processes to reconcile information and so on. So we just don't feel that you can charge very much money for, for data feeds, for ongoing access to data and so on. So we've tried to make it as absolutely low cost as we possibly can, hoping that encourages everybody to get on board. Because the reality is, if we can get, hundreds of BGAs and tens of thousands of advisors on board, carriers are going to, they're going to see a massive cost savings on their end, and then they're going to be more inclined to provide more data. We use the data to bring people to the platform. And then, to your point, now they're going to say, hey, we should open up other systems. We should connect through APIs and add services into the platform and so on. Again, the more people that are working together in these types of arenas, the more cost savings there is for everybody. It has a real network effect. So our attitude is to make data as absolutely low cost or free if possible.
That's great.
That low cost or free sound good to me as a distributor, because typically we're trying to in our case we build out a lot of our own technology, our own connections, and it's at least time consuming, and then you have your IT staff to go with it. So if we can figure out how to lessen our the impact to the BGA world, I think that I don't know that there's a BGA listening to the call that doesn't want to lower their overhead expenses around technology. Yeah. So I think that's a great point. That's why I wanted to ask, because from our perspective, technology should make this easier, faster, and less expensive. But many of the tech vendors have the mindset of 10, 20, 30 years ago, where the infrastructure costs were so expensive to them. And so they now charge, really high, kind of exorbitant pricing in comparison to what you can almost build from scratch today instead. So,
yeah, no, I think that's certainly been a big driver of what's going on. So let's pivot to another part of our all of our roles, whether you're a carrier, whether you're a BGA, whether you're the advisor, communicating with your customer and those policyholders is something that I guess as an industry we haven't done such a great job with, and it's another place where I think ultimately data and technology can help us improve that, and to Ryan's point earlier, make things more transparent, more readily available on time. So around sort of the idea of communicating and enhancing that area using technology, Ellen, from a carrier's perspective, how do you kind of communicate today to the various uplines and downlines, and where do you see that heading from a carrier's perspective?
Yeah, perfect. So effective, I don't know if that's the word that I would use to describe the communication, because it's not easy. not easy to build a system in a world where there's contacts changing and different things going on all the time. And so currently we use Salesforce that allows us to send direct communication to BGAs and agents. Where that goes wrong is that we're communicating to the broad audience all at one time. So we're not giving BGAs that opportunity to get ahead of the messaging. It's all coming at once. And so if we had an ability where we could be more strategic and communicating through to just those BGAs first, so that they have the information before we send it out to the agents, that would make everything so much better for everyone involved. And then from a policy owner standpoint, we do have a fairly easy to use portal that we have spent a lot of time on that can be accessed off our main page. It's pretty user friendly, and we have really moved to electronic delivery of all documents. This goes to clients, and it also goes to our BGA partners and agents, where they're getting an email letting them know that there's a new document, so that they can go into the portal and open it up. What's hard about that is it's a portal that requires a username and password. And so clients have 5,200 usernames and passwords. And thankfully, Apple created that nice keychain thing so that you don't have to remember all 52 usernames and passwords. And BGAs are working with so many carriers, it's hard for them to have to go in. And so we're really, ideally, especially for BGAs, it would be great for them to have one spot where they could go and access everything for every carrier.
Yep,
I think that's really what we're missing.
That would be great. I think we've got a little bit of a path to maybe towards getting there, but it's going to be difficult to aggregate all of that, but it would be wonderful for us. Ryan, you deal with lots of carriers, and there's so much differences out there on how carriers communicate with us and producers and clients. How are you trying to harness all of that and simplify it for both your staff and for the producers you work with?
I think data, Inforced or policy data is probably one of the, if not one of, maybe the biggest challenge for us as an agency. Partly because we get it in multiple formats, as you kind of alluded to, but also because the carriers don't send out information consistently, right? And I don't mean necessarily that it's in a consistent format, because that's also a problem, but each carrier has a different time cycle of how and what they send and when they send it. And part of that's just, again, kind of a cost savings thing where they've, we used to get paper statements for everything. And then it went, and those came in mail. And sometimes you got a big fat, stack of hundreds or even thousands of statements. And, thankfully I don't get many of those anymore. They've now moved to digital, but that creates a problem because, Ellen, you mentioned, getting into your website. It's great if the consumer knows how to get there, knows that their statements are there, knows how to get into them, but that's not usually the case. And so the kind of the brunt of this lands in the BGA's lap, which is the consumer wants the data, the agent wants the data, no one knows how to get the data, and a lot of times the BGA doesn't even have access to it because they've even been cut out of the communications loop where it's going directly to the agent, but the agent has to be able to get into the portal too, and they don't know their password. So it's this big challenge of data. When we figure that out, the universal will, the stars will align and the universe will all be happy and better. But I think what the other challenge of this is that how we communicate to consumers is the most important. And if you kind of look at it from that perspective, how do we get to the consumer? The challenge there is the consumer does move. They do have multiple email addresses. They do have different phone numbers. Many of the numbers we have on file for clients are home phone numbers that haven't existed in 5 or 6 years because they just went to mobile devices only. And we never got the cell phones, and we don't have the ability to text them. And then you get the legal problems of like TCPA, which is, actually prohibits us from calling our clients as the BGA or the agent after the policy has been enforced for like 90 days. That wasn't the intent of the law, I don't think, but that's a challenge. A lot of BGAs and agents especially don't even know that that's a rule, that they could get fined for or violating, right? And so I think that the broader challenge is how do we communicate effectively across all these different mediums and when we have a trouble getting to the data. So first is, getting access to the data and having the information in an easy to use format, which I think is getting better, but has a long way to go. The second is delivering the information to the agent and the consumer in whatever method or model they prefer. So, we need to kind of start figuring out, like, do you want a text message? Do you want it in, your Facebook Messenger? Do you want it through some chat application or platform? Do you want it in mail? Do you want us to send smoke signals? I don't really care how you want it, but we need to be able to deliver it, right? And so that's the bigger challenge, is there's not really a cohesive way to get it. I will tell you, just from our own experience, we get responses to text messages oftentimes within seconds. Same thing works with when we have access to social media accounts for some of our customers and agents within seconds. Email typically within a day or two. A lot of times, it's interesting how far email has fallen off over the last 5 or 6 years. Mail, surprisingly, has come back in vogue a little bit because most of us don't get it anymore other than junk mail. So occasionally when we see an envelope, we go, what's this? And it's like kind of mail marketing has come back in vogue a little bit. It works okay, but there's just that delay in time of getting it there. So I think, the answer is really communicate through all the methods and then start asking preferences in the process early on about what the consumer wants and being adjustable along the way to communicate. Phone calls, by the way, those are one of the hardest things to get an answer to. I'm not sure when the last time you got a call on your cell phone was and it said spam risk or telemarketer. I had to file an auto insurance claim recently, and the claims adjuster called me and it said spam risk, right? Because the telephone, AT&T, who's my cell phone provider, had already marked them because of the volume of calls that they were spam risk. So think about that from a carrier perspective and a BGA perspective. We're showing up at the customer and the agent's phone the same way a lot of times.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So Rick, you have some really great experience at this because of your Canadian platform. How do you see the opportunity to kind of harness what Ryan was talking about, where data can lead to better communications? How should we think about that you coming from a technologist perspective?
Yeah, we've taken a pretty bold approach to this, and it's in its infancy. We're trying to get it ramped up and working, but just a couple things. We do believe in leveraging the data, and as Ellen talked about, it's really important to make all your communications relevant and timely. And to do that, you need to leverage data to do that. But then that brings in a security issue. Okay, you can't be pushing out, data on unsecure networks and so on. Another angle to this was when we first started down this path, when we talked to carriers and BGAs about some of their major challenges, every single time, number one challenge was digital engagement. Mm-hmm. How do we engage with people digitally? Because there's all these channels, there's these apps, there's these tools, but most of our customers are doing business with 25 of us. Even the average agent is doing business with I think Ryan said the other day, 2.1 BGAs. So how do you do this? So what we've done is we use the Inforced data, and as I mentioned earlier, almost free access, and certainly free to agents, to bring the agents to the platform. Once they're on the platform, within our secure ecosystem, we open up digital channels so they can talk to their BGA, they can talk to their carrier. Carriers can communicate down, BGAs can communicate down. So we've built a chat ecosystem within our platform that really enables communication, sharing of documents. It allows carriers to look at, an advisor's book of business and communicate directly with that advisor through a secure channel. The other advantage of doing it that way is that there's a full record, so full history. And you can't do that today with the way the independent networks are set up, because all these advisors have their own CRMs, their own tools, their own apps, their own phone apps, their own everything. So we've created an ecosystem and bringing people to the ecosystem. Now, as that matures, we'll create APIs to push those communications out to phones, out to third-party apps, and so on and so forth. But we're really trying to get everybody onto one spot to share information, share data, and to communicate.
That sounds like a great option. I'm sure it's going to take some time to mature, but that's certainly a great direction, I think, for all of us. So I just kind of wanted to close the conversation. If either of you, any of you had any thoughts sort of about sort of where this all heads, what do you see sort of in the near term? I don't think any of us can predict, what these acceleration rates of adoption might be, but kind of in the near term, in the next couple of years, how do you see from a technology perspective and a carrier adopting more things? What's kind of on that next discussion point for you, Ellen, and we'll kind of do the same around the horn here.
Well, at Securian, it's actually a really large initiative right now to make sure that we are doing business in the easiest way for our clients. And when I say clients and channel partners, that includes the BGAs as well. So we've got a large investment in technology to help make it easier and make it a better experience for everyone overall.
And time frame on that?
A top, I would say within the next 2 years, but that's a really top-down driven approach. So
yeah.
It has the attention of everyone. It's a large undertaking.
Great. Well, that's exciting. Ryan, I know you've done a lot with a technology platform, and you've been driving this for years. How do you see that develop over the next, couple of years for you and your platform?
It's interesting. I think COVID accelerated a lot of this, and we keep hearing that, but it's true, right? There was a lot of carriers who were on the fence about, digital, distribution or digital applications and e-signature or voice signature, things like that. I also think with COVID and that inability sometimes to get into the consumer's home, a lot of the exam processes were dropped or changed drastically. And I think there's this thought that they'll come back or be more like normal. I don't think that that's the case. And so from my perspective, what I really see happening is that the bulk of our carriers will be non-med, if not straight through, nearly straight through processing, where the consumer and the agent together in some form or fashion will go through the quotation process on the front end, the data collection in the middle, and then have real-time or near real-time decisioning from automated underwriting engines on the back end, whether those come from the reinsurers or they're homegrown, doesn't really matter to me. With data collection for payment information, which creates some other challenges, and then policy delivery. And so if that's really the future, if that's really where things are going, which I adamantly believe is the case, what does the typical BGA look like in that distribution model 3 or 5 years from now? So we're really looking at how to streamline and remove some of the human element from the pieces that we think are going to be automated, but keeping the human touch where we know it helps move the process along. So I think realistically that's going to be the challenge for BGAs, and especially the BGAs that have not really been tech forward thinking or adopting of technology, because of the transition at the carrier level and kind of the processing level. They don't have a lot of time to kind of wait anymore on the sidelines. If they're not there now or nearly there now or moving quickly there, I think unfortunately they'll get left behind because they just won't have the ability to access products. And the carriers, I think in large measure, I don't know any carrier that likes getting paper today. So I think paper applications go away, digital process becomes the norm. Examless processes probably under 3 or 5 million as an industry probably become the norm. And instant decisioning or near instant decisioning, 15 minutes to 3 days, call it, become again the norm. And so we start looking a lot more like a commoditized delivery platform. And then so how does the BGA and the agent add value? And that becomes the question.
Yeah, it's for another discussion as this continues to develop. Rick, how do you see the near term developing from your perspective?
I'm looking at it more from a technology perspective. And, if you think about, talked earlier about the infrastructure, the low cost infrastructure now, and making it, possible to do more things. And then we talk about liberating the data or democratizing the data. So now the data becomes available and so on and accessible. And the next wave, which really lines up exactly with what Ellen and Ryan just talked about, is that the carriers and the BGAs are going to become, API capable. They can, carriers will have APIs to access data, to access services, push data in and out of systems. So will BGAs. And I've been so encouraged by conversations with carriers about, their API strategy. One of the carriers recently published a library of APIs that we're able to connect with for things like policy service changes, more information about a policy or about an advisor. And I think that's going to be the next big wave. And it's going to make, data and services ubiquitous. You're going to be able to access them from, however you want, multiple solutions and so on. So that's where I think we're going to see the next few years are going to be really exciting with all that. Might not be exciting to a lot of you BGA folks, but to us tech folks, it's really cool.
Well, really appreciate all of the insights that this panel has provided. I think it's been really good information, a lot of stuff to think about as well for us in the BGA community. We'll continue the conversation around how this is going to develop, and technology will continue to change our lives. So thank you all for participating, and have a good holiday weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.